What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths, and finally, the story's getting amazing, because the first two issues were basically just Deathstroke attacking people, and that's kind of happening here, but it's actually a lot bigger than that, and it's a lot cooler. So, one of the things that we established so far is that the son of Superman, Jonathan Kent, after the basically supposed deaths of the Justice League, Jonathan Kent wanted to form a new Justice League, right? One that could kind of pick up the slack from where his father and the rest of the Justice League had basically died. The issue with this is that Jonathan Kent is young and he's very full of hope, which is not an inherently bad thing, but he's not realistic about the environment that he's in. And so a lot of people initially shot him down, right? A lot of people were just kind of like, no, you're not ready for this. You think you are, but you're not. Enter Black Adam. And Black Adam's response after watching Jonathan Kent's kind of Justice League basically fail was him stepping in and saying, I'm going to take over and I'm going to turn you into the Justice League that you need to be. Now, this is cool because when it comes to Black Adam, he's one of these guys where sometimes he's a good guy, sometimes he's a bad guy, but the reality is there's no half measures when it comes to Black Adam, right? Like, he goes all the way. And so what he literally says here is, all your instincts are good, I'll give you that, but you're not experienced enough. The Dark Army that killed the Justice League is still out there, and you could be next. None of you are as heroic as those who have fallen before you. The Justice League shadows are so large that you are lost in them, which is why Deathstroke is winning. Deathstroke's army attacks heroes and then warp teleports them out before you can catch them. It's happening across the world, and these attacks will never stop until Deathstroke has killed you all. Now, on the surface, it's easy to interpret this as basically Black Adam just being a dick, but the reality is that it's not true. That what Black Adam is saying here, in really more words that cut than anything else, is effectively saying, you guys are wanting to be heroes, and that's great, but you have to understand the reality of the situation that you're in. The Dark Army is composed of villains that are on a whole different level than anything any of you have ever faced before. Not only that, they are well experienced on an individual level and facing off against the entire Justice League in some capacity. If one of them was a match for the Justice League, it's no small wonder the Justice League even survived as long as they did against the combined might of the Dark Army, which is basically a team composed of people who have all defeated or at least held their own against the Justice League in some capacity. You have to understand the reality of this, because hope is not enough. Now, what he ends up doing here, and this is what's really cool, is he ends up grabbing a guy by the name of Count Vertigo. Now, Count Vertigo is not the most significant villain ever, but this is actually Black Adam showing them what they need to do, right? You guys are not willing to do what must be done. And that's the difference here, right? We talked about this when we covered our story World War III, where Black Adam went to war against the DC Universe. If you're interested in that, you can actually find the playlist for that down in the description, which you're welcome to check out after this video. But the thing about this is that Black Adam put forward this idea that he was willing to do whatever it took to take on the world. There are no limits when it comes to Black Adam. There is no such thing as right and wrong. Black Adam lives his philosophy in two ideologies. There's what a man can do and what a man can't do. And that's it. That's all there is. And what Black Adam can do is kill people. And that's the point that he's trying to make here, right? When they ask, like, why do you have Count Nefaria? Like, what did you do to him? The response of Black Adam is, we should execute him and then string his body up in front of the Justice League headquarters as a warning to anybody who would side with Deathstroke. And the reality here is there's merit to that argument. And the reason why is this. If you were to take traditional comic book battles, right? The dichotomy between good and evil, right and wrong, right? Lex Luthor versus Superman, or the Joker versus Batman, and you were to translate those to the real world, the villains would win 99% of the time. And the reason why is because the heroes are not willing to do what it takes in order to win, right? The nature of comics is that the writers just kind of cook the books towards the end, right? You know, it's like, well, the villain's got the upper hand. How in the world can the hero win? Well, the hero pulls out some kind of ace up their sleeve and they save the day. And that's basically it, right? It's literally cooking the books in order to ensure the heroes win, because that's how it's supposed to work. But in a realistic situation, the villains would win almost all the time. And that's what makes Black Adam so interesting when it comes to DC Comics, is because he's almost kind of like a real world representation of what superheroes would have to be in order to succeed against villains. Because if guys like Deathstroke know that the heroes won't kill villains, then it literally leaves the playing field open for Deathstroke and his guys to pretty much do whatever they want, and that ultimately the heroes just won't take that final step. The response of Black Adam is, you have to learn to. You have to learn to be willing to kill. You have to learn to accept the fact that there are some people out there that will never stop unless you kill them. Either that or that's the only language they understand. That if you kill one of their own and you string them up, they'll get the message. Right now, again, a lot of people kind of default to the slippery slope argument. As I always say, that's the argument you make when you have no other argument to make. But the reality here is that's the nature of the beast. That's what it means when you're facing off against a threat like that. And so what ends up happening here is you actually have Jonathan who steps up to Black Adam and is just like, stop. Right? And the issue is that you kind of have the other members who are here that are kind of debating with each other. Like, I mean, aren't the Justice League supposed to do more than just fight bad guys? Like, aren't we like a humanitarian team? We save lives, different things like that. But Black Adam, and this is what's so interesting here, Black Adam tries to instill the fact that they don't understand the situation, that the Justice League are dead. Right? And they didn't see what Black Adam saw. They didn't watch as the Justice League, the world's most powerful superheroes, struggled against the Dark Army, barely escaped by defeating these guys, only to be utterly annihilated and defeated by Pariah, who barely even put up a fight. They didn't see this. They didn't see that unfold, right? Black Adam was there. He watched Superman get overpowered in a way that had virtually never been seen before. Superman never even began to have a chance against a guy like Pariah. And literally Jonathan Kent is standing here saying, if we have hope, and if we fight the good fight, Black Adam, and we do the right thing, then by golly, we can defeat Pariah and his Dark Army. It's childish. Right? It's a childish philosophy in a wartime conflict. Jonathan Kent is doing the equivalent of bringing a knife to a gunfight. And no, this is not one of those instances from Starship Troopers where you throw a knife and disable their hand so they can't press a button. That this is a more tangible situation where they will die. They will be destroyed, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so what you end up getting is before Black Adam can actually kill Count Vertigo, Yara steps in. Now, for those of you guys who are just joining us here, Yara is not the newest Wonder Woman. She's kind of a stand-in for Wonder Woman at the moment, for Diana. But the reality here is Yara is basically a girl from a Amazonian tribe, which is akin to the Themyscirians, right? Basically imagine Wonder Woman's group, but just living in a different part of the world. And that's where Yara comes from. But the reality here is that in the end, Black Adam just walks away because it's one of these things where these guys just don't really understand the gravity of the situation. And so what ends up happening here is you basically pick up with, of course, Jonathan Kent standing outside. Damian Wayne leaves, right? I mean, it's one of the coolest exchanges between the two because Damian starts talking about how Alfred used to ramble all sorts of idioms, right? Like, it's always darkest before the dawn and yada, yada, yada. And he's like, but I don't even think that we've reached the darkness. And when we do, we won't be ready for it, right? In a lot of ways, whether Damian's willing to admit it or not, he agrees with Black Adam's philosophies. Jonathan standing in the way of that will actually spell their impending doom. You could even make a credible argument in saying Jonathan is intentionally marching them to their own deaths by refusing to accept the reality of the world they live in, the situation they have. And so what ends up going on is that while Damian and Jonathan are sort of arguing with each other, you basically get the arrival of the JSA. Now, here's the cool thing about this, right? This is interesting because I'm curious to see what direction this goes in. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm actually reading these comics before I cover them, right? Like, I haven't read the entirety of Dark Crisis because I want to kind of join you guys and like being unsure about how it ends. I kind of love that, right? Like, I love just not like being as uncertain as you guys about like what's gonna happen next, right? Like, I love that, right? I love the excitement of not being sure what's going to take place. It's kind of a cool thing. But the thing about this is that the JSA, they are in a lot of ways similar to Black Adam regarding experience and knowing what it takes to basically come out on top, but they're also different in the sense that they kind of have wisdom and they know ways to work around Black Adam's philosophies. And in fact, the Justice League learned a lot of what they did from the JSA. So these guys could potentially basically lead Jonathan down a wiser path, but also maintain the role of being superheroes. It's kind of the nature of the JSA, right? Like, you walk up to anybody, those are guys who aren't really knowledgeable about DC Comics, you walk up to anybody who's a fan of the JSA and start spouting off stuff like, oh, the JSA, man, they're old and they're boring, and then they ride around in mobility scooters, Alan Scott, Jay Garrick, they're old as hell. They gotta wake up 3 times a night just to take a piss, right? Those guys will get pissed. They'll get so mad. And the reason why is because within DC Comics, the Justice Society of America is kind of the forerunner to almost every superhero team that exists out there. All-Star Squadron, the Justice League of America, Infinity Inc., all those different teams that exist out there, all basically in some form or fashion took their lead from the Justice Society of America. So they do have a lot to offer in terms of experience and wisdom. And so what we end up doing is jumping to Deathstroke's headquarters. Now again, where this story initially opened up with the idea that Deathstroke was just being opportunistic, that with the Justice League out of the picture, Deathstroke was just launching an attack against various forces in the superhero community by basically unifying all these different villains, knowing that there was no Justice League to protect anybody. The reality and what we've learned so far is, in fact, Deathstroke is being manipulated by Pariah, who's controlling the darkness, right? So literally, the whole point of what Deathstroke is doing is to basically start a crisis. Now, initially, the idea behind starting this crisis was to basically defeat superheroes and whisk them away. But starting a crisis is more of a metaphysical one. And that's Joshua Williamson seemingly building on what had happened over the course of DC Comics with like Scott Snyder's, Batman death metal or DC Comics death metal and all that kind of stuff. That when it comes to a crisis, it's more of like an emotional crisis. Think of it like a midlife crisis for the DC universe. That's kind of how those things how those things exist in the modern era. Now, you also do have stuff like a main villain who launches an attack and so on and so forth, but by basically ridding the world of superheroes, allowing the villains to take over, creating a world of absolute chaos and pandemonium, it basically allows the darkness to sort of feed in, to creep into this, both by influencing people as well as physically entering, because there'd be no Justice League to protect anybody. And so in the midst of Deathstroke launching his attack, he's ultimately met by Ravager, who had tried to sneak in and was caught by Deathstroke's forces. Now, Ravager, long story short, she's the daughter of Deathstroke. She's ridiculously capable. And Ravager, let me tell you something, man, Ravager, this girl can hold her own against basically anybody. This girl's held her own against Batman, if that tells you anything, right? I mean, this girl, she's pretty solid. She's very, very capable here. But what's so astonishing to her is that in a lot of ways, she sort of identifies with Deathstroke and is somewhat of an anti-hero like he is. But even for her, going through the world, attacking superheroes in the absence of the Justice League, and then presumably whisking them away, that's even too big of a pill for her to swallow, right? And she even calls Deathstroke on it, right? Like, why in the world would you do this? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, I've known you to do some off-the-wall stuff, but even to me, this is exceedingly crazy. The wild thing here is Deathstroke turns around and looks at her, and that's when she realizes something's wrong. Now, from our perspective as the reader, Deathstroke is influenced by the darkness, right? Literally just not really even evil per se, just the opposite of life is really all it is. Ravager doesn't fully understand what's going on. And what ends up happening is where Deathstroke makes his move to try to bring her into the darkness, she of course fights back, but then Deathstroke instead unleashes the darkness on all of his forces, which basically allow those guys to presumably be whisked away. Now from here, we pick up with the Green Lanterns, of course, again, the group that's sort of reformed, not to the huge numbers that they were before, since again, the source of the central power battery, the Green Lantern battery, has basically been destroyed, right? So you only have a handful of Green Lanterns left, but they've basically arrived on Ryut, right? Sector 666. Now, this is under normal circumstances, the home of the Red Lantern Corps, right? And that's the reason why it's kind of called Sector 666, is because when the Red Lanterns were initially introduced to DC Comics, they were kind of like the evil Lanterns, but as Jeff Johns fleshed out the Green Lantern mythos, it was less that they were evil and more just on a warpath of destruction, right? Because they'd basically been screwed over by what they perceived to be the Guardians of the Universe, and there's a whole backstory that goes into it. But what's more intriguing here is that the Black Lantern Central Battery has arrived here. Now, this requires some explanation for new folks because I imagine this might sort of leave you out. So if you've come from Marvel Comics, then you probably know that you have like Mistress Death, right? She represents the idea of death, a person dying and moving on to the afterlife. But you also have what are in effect facsimiles of Mistress Death. So you have avatars like Thanos, for example, who, depending on what era of comics you're reading, basically is like the living avatar of death, the individual who goes around and just kills people in order to send them to the afterlife. But then you've also got Hela from the Asgardian mythos, who is believed to be an avatar of Mistress Death, right? Kind of a facsimile of her. But the idea is that you have beings that walk around Marvel Comics that represent death, and that's established in Marvel Comics. In DC Comics, you don't necessarily have that, but you kind of do. It's just something that was never really confirmed by DC. The Black Lantern is the Lantern Corps of Death, right? And it's led by the being Nekron. In the Blackest Night, Brightest Day storyline, that was when Nekron made his move and basically resurrected all the different superheroes who had died and even supervillains who had died, and basically did so by giving them Black Lantern rings. The idea here, though, is that there never really seemed to be a direct connection between Nekron and like the concept of death. He was just sort of a representative of it, kind of, but not really. What Joshua Williamson is doing here is actually saying that instead of Nekron representing death itself, he's an avatar of the Great Darkness, right? He represents Great Darkness, that sort of thing, right? So again, not a direct connection, but kind of. It's sort of Joshua Williamson building these representations that exist out there. So it's one of those things where really for the first time in DC Comics, Nekron is actually being given a reason for his existence outside of the fact that he just resurrects dead lanterns or dead superheroes from the dead, giving them Black Lantern rings. And that's essentially it. But the thing about this is that out of curiosity and wanting to know where this leads, like you have Hal Jordan and a couple other lanterns who basically enter into the Black Lantern itself, right? Literally enter into the central power battery. And when they do, they're directly transported to Pariah. Now, this is the cool thing here, is because Pariah says, I had hoped it would be you, Hal Jordan. I had hoped that you would be the person that would enter here. Now, of course, you do also have, Kyle Rayner. And so it is cool to see these guys here in front of Pariah, because what we haven't seen is what happens when you have the Green Lanterns, who essentially have a limitless source of energy, going against someone as powerful as Pariah, who was single-handedly able to overpower the Justice League with the greatest of ease. And so what's kind of nuts about here is that you do have Pariah kind of pitching himself out there and saying, like, I am here to fix everything, right, to make the multiverse a better place, to bring it back, yada, yada, yada. The same thing that he was saying before. But looking at the outfit of Pariah, Hal Jordan kind of reminisces on two different things. The first is when he was Parallax, or went by the name Parallax, when he was influenced by that entity from the emotional spectrum. But the other thing is Superboy Prime. Now, no, you don't see Superboy Prime here, but this is similar to the outfit that he wears. And this is just one of those energy transfer outfits that Pariah is wearing. It allows him to channel energy into himself and then store it, which is seemingly what's keeping him so powerful. But what's kind of nuts is you have Hal Jordan, who launches his attack against Pariah, but it's only really more of a distraction than anything else. What he ends up doing is basically trying to seize the multiverse itself, right? These worlds that Pariah has created that are basically being used by the Great Darkness to expand its power and expand its influence. But when Hal Jordan seizes control of it, he realizes just how much power this is, just how capable this is, right? It would potentially amp up his abilities to a whole new level, because while he is physically holding a world, he's quite literally channeling the power of a universe, which is kind of crazy. The problem is it's more than he can handle, and he's ultimately teleported away in the same way that Batman and Superman and the rest of the Justice League were. And so he ends up emerging in this world that's completely composed of hard-like constructs. And in fact, he's met by what is arguably the most badass looking Green Lanterns that I think I've ever seen in DC Comics. They're pretty dope looking, not gonna lie. And he's told that he's currently in John Stewart's sector, right? And it's kind of like, okay, that's weird that John Stewart has a sector named after himself. And so what we end up doing is joining back with Black Adam. And this is when things get cool. Now, what ends up going on here is Black Adam basically making his way through a swamp, kind of just starts talking to this group of people and saying, the problem with the Justice League and the problem with Jonathan Kent's team is that they're not willing to do what needs to be done. In order to ensure that Pariah is defeated, in order to ensure that the day is saved, what we need is a more sinister hand. What we need is a group of people who are willing to come together to defeat these forces and are willing to do what needs to be done. What I think the world and even the universe needs is the Legion of Doom. Lex Luthor, Vandal Savage, Sinestro, the chick that replaced Harley Quinn. Nobody cares about her. But like other people, right? Like we need villains to lead this charge. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this story kind of looks like it's shaping up to be Forever Evil. And that storyline was amazing. But with that being said, guys, make sure you check this video out up here so you guys get caught up on Dark Crisis. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.